So welcome everybody to our bi-monthly Baba Zoom program hosted by Mayher Archive Collective. I'm Evie Lindeman and I'm the board chair at Mayher Archive Collective. And we have today what I consider an unusual and kind of exciting program with two different speaker storytellers. Before we do that, I first want to give thanks to Heather Mashandaro, who was the creative genius behind starting this every other month Babazoon, sponsored by MAC. So thank you to Heather and to Debbie Nordine, who also assisted her, and to Angela for her Babazoon programs, and Diana Goodheart, our technical person who starts and stops the meeting and stays with us the whole time. So thank you to Diana as well. So today we're going to have two guest speakers, Scott O'Neill and Steve Berry. And I'd like to tell you just a little bit about both of them as we start the program today. I think it's always interesting to hear a little bit of biographical background about how it was that somebody landed at Baba's feet. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Steve first. Steve was born in Santa Paula, California in 1947. At that time, Santa Paula was a little country town located about 10 miles as the crow flies from Mayher Mount in Ojai. However, he never visited Mayher Mount when he was a kid. And at age 12, he and his family moved away to the big city in Los Angeles County. So he considers that he has a little bit of country and a little bit of city in him, and I would guess that's probably true. Subsequently, he attended the University of California, Irvine, where he was a psychology major, but did not pursue it as a graduate student. He ended up instead with a career in real estate. And one day when I asked him, how did he do that all that time, sales, which requires a particular talent, he had a very unusual response. He said, no, I never really did sales. What I did was I just tried to respond to people's needs and think of Baba. I thought that was a really interesting paradigm for thinking about sales, really not as that, but as service. Other activities over the years for Steve included surfing, windsurfing, kite surfing, and paragliding. So paragliding means flying through the air with a kind of parachute. So sometime if you ever looked up and saw somebody floating high up, it could have been Steve himself. He followed Maharishi for a period of time and then became a disciple of Yogananda. And in 1970, he picked up the discourses and felt strongly that Baba is, quote unquote, a heavyweight dude. In 1972, he journeyed to Myrtle Beach, to the center, where he learned from inner experience that Baba is absolutely for real. And then in 1973, he went to India for 4 months and subsequently journeyed there a number of different times. And it was in India that he and Scott O'Neill first made contact with each other. So now I'm going to tell you a little bit about Scott. Scott currently lives near Asheville. He grew up in an Air Force family with a dad who was a military officer and spent the first 12 years of his life in Europe. After that, the family moved back to the United States, and he grew up in the United States until he was late teens. His dad retired and moved the family to Miami. And he said he grew up as an Episcopalian, in which I said, oh, well, maybe that's the connection. He said, well, from his perspective, the main emphasis in being an Episcopalian is don't embarrass anyone else in your family. So he spent 2 years in college.
Did Scott succeed or fail?
I think you can answer that one.
He spent 2 years in college, and then he started his first business. And if any of you know Scott personally, you know that he has the true entrepreneurial spirit. He said he's rubbed a couple of pennies together over time and has been involved in 9 different businesses so far. And I think we might still be counting. And so one thing that's true about Scott is he always sees the possibilities and not the negativities in any prospective business idea. So his first trip to India was in 1973 at the young age of 17. He was one of those smart kids that finished high school early. And right after high school, he got a job and earned enough money to get himself to India. So he managed to fly to Europe, and then he went overland and did what so many of us did, which is buses, trains, and hitchhiking across the world through the Middle East, through Iran, through Afghanistan, and into India. So Scott and Steve remain very, very good friends to this day. In fact, Scott lived with Steve in Northern California in 1974, where they were both involved with Irwin Luck in a Baba project. I personally enjoy my friendships with both of them, and I would say that one strong trait they have in common is an incredible sense of humor, as well as their passion for all things Baba and unique perspectives on their life histories and experiences, some of which they're going to share today. So, Scott and Steve, take it away.
I think Steve was going to go
Okay.
first and provide a little context and biography of Audie that I thought, because Steve knows that as good as anybody, and Audie shared with him a lot of it.
Okay, well, we'll start off with a brief bio, then go into some good stories from Scott and myself of Adi, and then we'll open up the meeting to questions, and also anybody that would like to share and have stories and memories of their own. Firstly, I would like to mention that I think that quote that Evie gave about about Scott's business acumen applies to me in that she said he overlooks the negativity and focuses on the positivity. I think that's why Scott and I have remained good friends.
Oh.
That's supposed to be a joke. I guess it bombed. Anyway, so giving a brief bio here of Adi. He was born in 1903, and his parents fortuitously happened to live in Ahmednagar, which is a fabulous location if you want to bump into the Avatar. And as many of you probably know, that his family lived in Kushru quarters, which is now the trust. And they were all Orthodox, good or Zoroastrian, so they had no interest in spiritual masters, especially spiritual masters of any associated with any other religion. And then we'll fast forward to when Adi was 16 years of age. His mother, Gulmai, one night she had a very powerful mystical dream in which a aged Hindu master appeared before her and conversed and communicated with her all night long. I mean, hours and hours long dream. And she didn't know his name. She just knew that he was the real deal. So then shortly thereafter, one of Gulmai's relatives pesters her to go visit this Hindu master named, I'm sorry, what was his name? Upasni
Upasni?
Maharaj. Yeah, Osni. And so she goes along, she acquiesces and goes along, although she's not really interested in other masters or any masters, period. Anyway, she meets Upasni, and upon meeting him, recognizes that he is the man that appeared to her in that night hours-long dream. And so being overcome by the incredible feelings in front of, by meeting Upasni, she falls at his feet. Now, Gulmai then begins to go visit Upasni regularly. And now Adi is age 16 at this time, and he's away at boarding school for high school. And he comes home for the summer. So his mother cooks up a ruse. She thinks that of all of her children, Adi might be, more inclined toward something like this. But he, on his own, has no interest in any other religious figures of any sort. And so anyway, Gulmai cooks up a ruse of needing Adi to drive her to Sakari to spend some time with Upasni Maharaj. So reluctantly, Adi agrees because, good boys do what their mother asks. And so he takes his mother there, and upon arriving, he meets Upasni, who he felt very indifferent toward, but upon meeting him, all of a sudden, he's overcome by the augustness of Upasni's presence, and Adi himself finds himself falling down at Upasni's feet. So something he'd never anticipated or expected. Anyway, subsequently, they start going to visit Upasni on a regular basis, and who, as you may recall, should be Upasni's number one disciple? Merwan. And so they begin to develop a fond relationship with Merwan. And then, of course, at some point, Upasni then says that it makes the announcement that he has painted Merwan in all the colors of the rainbow, and now it is time for Merwan to leave and take a number of Upasni's disciples with him, including Mera, including Gulmai, Adi, Rustam, Adi's brother, and a number of others. So they all go off with Baba. And thus, Adi's life with Baba begins. Now we'll fast forward here to I guess, Adi's now 18 years of age, and they're, of course, living in the what is now the trust compound. And you may remember, probably you all do, from being at Lower Mehrabad, there's that small, like, tomb, just kind of like a green tent, Galori Shah. Any of you seen that?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Anyway, Baba said that Galori Shah was on the sixth plane, so not too shabby. Anyway, somehow Adi and Galori, they started up, had a connection, and so Galori would come by the Kushru quarters and wait out there for Adi to come out and invite him in, unlock the gate and let him in. They would have tea together, and they would do this on a regular basis. Now, I couldn't help but reflect. Let's see. So Adi's hung out. He's 18. He hung out with a perfect master. Now he's hanging out with the avatar, and now he's hanging out with this sixth plane saint. And then I compared myself. Who was I hanging out with when I was 18? I could tell you. I probably shouldn't even describe my partners in those days. Anyway, a very, very vast difference between most of us and what Adi was going through at age 18. So then we fast forward to 1923, and that's when Baba established Mehrabad. And as most of you, I think, know, Mehrabad belonged to Adi's dad, Kushru. And so Kushru, or Kai Kushru as he was known, then donated all the land of Lower and Upper Mehrabad to Baba. And at this point in time, as Adi was spending more and more time with Baba, he began to, of course, receive the messages that Baba conveyed to his early mandali about the importance of obedience. And so I'll just give a couple of quick mini stories about obedience to kind of give you a picture of what Adi was learning and going through with Baba in those early days. So do you all know about the story of when Adi killed a child? Hello?
No.
I hope
Not
you
very
will tell
well.
us.
Oh, okay. So anyway, Baba assigns a mission for Adi and his older brother Rustam to go take care of some Baba business. And he instructs Adi, who was like a hotshot driver. So he always drove because he was fast and good. And I mean really fast. And Scott, I think you have a story about that, which you should tell at some point about Adi being fast.
Oh, yeah,
Anywho,
absolutely.
so Adi and his brother take off. They do this, whatever assignment they have, but the noon hour is approaching, and Adi is very clear that Baba emphasized over and over, you must be back by noon. And so he keeps on telling Rustam, let's go, let's go, let's go. But Rustam, being the older brother, said, no, no, back off. Like, kid, brother, back off. And so finally, Adi drags Rustam out of there, and they're on their way back, and Adi's speeding along through the streets of Ahmednagar. And he comes around a corner. Some kids are playing, and one of them pushes another child, and right in front of the front tire of Adi's car, and boom, that kid is dead. And Adi's arrested. But before he's arrested, he, of course, slams on his brakes. And when the car comes to a stop, his hands are on the steering wheel. He looks at his watch. And what time is it? 12 noon. And so he's thinking, oh my God, Baba emphasized I'd be back, and here it is. So I really have to, pay attention to Baba's instructions, even better. He should have overpowered his elder brother's uncooperativeness and made them leave. Anyway, that's just a good example of obedience. Another one is, I think of myself when sometimes I get upset about something or other. Maybe let's just say I get angry. Well, it might take me, 5 minutes or 10 minutes, 5 minutes or so to calm down and be more reasonable if I'm really, really upset about something. So I think it's true for most of us. If we really get upset, then we need a few minutes to just chillax. Also, in this particular case, they're at Lower Mehrabad in mid-20s, and a lot of people are there, a huge gathering. And one of Adi's professors from school happens to show up and to meet Meher Baba. And after he meets Baba, he then begins to berate, dress down Baba in front of everyone, loudly, verbally castigating Baba. And what does Baba do? Just smiles congenially and lets the man rant onward. No defending himself whatsoever. Well, this goes on for a while until finally Adi can take it no more. Of course, he's grew up with a good family. He learned how to be respectful to his elders, like his teachers, but he could not take his teacher treating Baba like this. So he blurted out and said, "Who in the hell do you think you are, talking to Meher Baba like this?" And he blasts this guy. And Adi, as I'm sure you could all imagine, he was capable of a good, strong temper. So he blasts this guy out, and the man looks to Baba and says, "Oh, so this is the kind of disciples you have around you, huh?" And he races off. And so Baba then says to him, to Adi, "Run after that man and get his forgiveness before coming back to me." So Adi has to change his mood from, being protective, which is a strong emotion, protective of someone you love, and being very angry, justifiably angry. He's got to change his mood and run after this guy and beg his forgiveness. So he does it. He changes his mood and puts on the full race, catches up with the teacher and says, "Please forgive me, please forgive me." And the man says, "Get away from me, Jao, get away, you dog." And so finally Adi realizes the teacher's about to get in the car. So what does Adi do? Being resourceful, he grabs the guy's leg and foot and hangs onto them so the man can't walk. And he's saying, "Please forgive me, please forgive me." And the teacher's trying to shake Adi off, but Adi won't let go of his lower leg. And so finally, in order to get back into his car, the teacher then says, okay, I forgive you. And Adi lets go and races back to Baba. So good lessons in obedience, and bravo to Adi for being quick and imaginative on his toes. Then one last story of early obedience, and we'll move on. Do you all know that Adi had a fiancée?
No.
Okay. Anyway, he met this lovely gal, and he's a very eligible, handsome, wealthy bachelor, and he and this gal fall in love, and they want to get married. And so she becomes his fiancée, and they go to Baba and ask for his blessing. And Baba says, okay, both of you come into this room and sit down in these chairs, and have one chair facing one direction and the other chair back to back facing the opposite direction. The girl sits in one chair, Adi in the other, with their backs toward each other. And Baba tells Adi, now you keep quiet until I tell you. So it's an order. And Adi wants to obey. And that's when Baba begins to describe to this gal how miserable her life will be if she should marry this rascal. And Baba just goes on and on and on, and Baba could be very, very descriptive and persuasive. And this girl becomes terrified of Adi, thinking about the horrible, miserable, abject, terrible life that she would endure with him. And so Adi, he wants to spring to his own defense, but he can't say a word because he's wanting to obey. He's holding obedience higher than his true love. And so, of course, she departs, and that's it. Because obviously, Baba had higher and better things in mind for Adi's life. And so, let's see. I'm going to skip some of these stories because we're short on time. See, I don't. What time is it right now?
Steve, you're okay on time. We're going to just keep this program. It normally would have ended at 12:30. We'll end it at 1, and people can stay on afterwards if they want to have conversations. So don't worry.
Okay. So this is an example of Adi's wit and fun personality. And even though I remember, and I think a lot of people felt this way, when I met Adi on my first trip to India, I was there for 4 months. And I was duly impressed with Adi and really liked him and admired him. But I was quite intimidated by him. He seemed like such a powerhouse of a guy. I just, was very reserved around him. And so a lot of people didn't know that, and other people may have felt the same way and didn't realize how approachable and congenial and fun Adi could be. But here's a quick story about his wit and and his consciousness on obedience. So 1930s, they're in Italy. And maybe it was Portofino or one of those places. And they're Baba had his men and women mandali with him. And also there are lots and lots of guests and visitors arriving, and they're staying in this large place, large estate. And in the dining room, they've taken the table there and converted it into a paradise of desserts. All kinds of desserts just filled up that table. And so Adi, being a chocolate lover, noticed that. And but Baba then forbade all the men mandali on their side. The women mandali were on one side, the men on the other. And he forbade all the men mandali for having, in fact, actually he forbade everyone from having any desserts, except that Kakabaria wasn't there. And Kaka was the go-between man, the messenger. He would take messages from Baba, go to the women, take another message from Baba, go to the men, et cetera, et cetera. So Adi knows all this, and he sees this fantastic tray of delicious chocolates. So he takes Kaka aside. He says, look, of course, I can't go into the room and take any chocolates for myself, as Baba's order, but you can take the chocolates and bring them to me, and we'll eat them together. And Kaka is, of course, reluctant, but Adi is very persuasive, and he persuades Kaka to bring this tray of chocolate desserts in to share with Adi. He brings it in and says, I'll be right back, but in the meantime, Adi starts eating them, and they're all so good. Well, somehow Adi finishes them all off. And so Kaka's a little shocked at that. But then, naturally, Baba finds out that somebody took the chocolates. So he gets to the bottom of it. He calls Adi and Kaka in and says, begins to chastise them for lack of obedience. Now, Adi, being quick-witted, he says to Baba, he says, well, yeah, I did ask Kaka to do that, but let me ask you a question, Baba. If I told Kaka to jump in the lake, should he? And of course, Kaka immediately got a very sour expression on the face because he realized that Adi was throwing him under the bus. And Baba looked at them both and said, well, Adi's got a point there. You don't have to obey anything that Adi says, but you did. And so then Baba focuses his castigation on Kaka, and Adi is scot-free. Anyway, so those are the kinds of humorous incidents that occurred, and Jack and Baba was Adi was tons of fun like that. So we'll fast forward and to 1973, and that's when Scott and I both landed in India. And Scott, did you want to share some stories about your times there?
Steve was a seasoned pilgrim by the time I arrived. He probably had been there for 3 weeks before me. So when I got there, of course, I assumed he was somebody that you could take direction from and look up to, being my elder. I was 17 and he was like 25. So one of the most welcoming things that happened to me when I first got to India was the very first mandali I met at about 9:45 in the evening was Adi K, because I showed up at the trust office having taken the train from Mumbai. And that's all I knew was to go to the trust office. So that's how I met Adi. And he told me to check into the Dalit Lodge. Shortly, about 4 days or 5 days after I got to India, to Ahmednagar, I'm sure I had met Steve before that, but during that 4 or 5 days, Steve, my good friend Roger Stevens, approached Steve with a plot to make my trip and pilgrimage more real, which was I was sick with the flu, but they decided to stand outside my room commenting to each other about the unlucky pilgrim who got sent home by the mandali because he had the same symptoms as I have, and it appeared that I had encephalitis. All of this was made up. But
by the way, Scott, you should inject one thing. Roger had me come in and examine you medically.
Yeah.
Like we came into the room, examined medically, and then Roger says, let's talk outside, Steve. And so that's when we went outside after having looked at you. And that's when our chat began. We made sure to speak certainly loudly enough where you could hear every single word.
So I was sitting in there dying and worried that I was going to be shipped home before the pilgrimage had even really gotten off to a start. But they let me hang out for hours before they really revealed the fact that they were kidding me. But I want to mention one thing. Steve and I, would trade notes, so to speak, on, sometimes we were out at Merazad. We weren't always together by any means, but if we saw each other, sometimes we would compare notes. And this actually brings up an interesting point. Steve and I talked a little yesterday, but one of the games, and it was a game that Steve invented, was what will the mandali say? And what I mean by that is someone would ask them a question, whether it was Erich or Audi or someone like that. And when we were there, in our own mind, we wouldn't say anything out loud. We would guess what story or comment the mandali would make. And here's what's so interesting. We were almost never correct. We might have had the theme a little bit, but it was so beautiful to watch Erich and Audi would answer people in a way that seemed to be about their, not only the truth as Baba knew it, but those people's higher truth. In other words, they tuned in. So, and we're giving people something that was so relevant to their life and inspired by Baba. So the atmosphere, and I think Steve would agree with this, I would say for me, Steve, and many others, we weren't unique in this. The opportunity to be there and be able to converse with Adi and other Mandali members was very apparent as a very unique, special thing. And I think most of us really went all the way out to make sure we could take advantage of it, listen to what the Mandali said, hear what Adi was saying, keep our mouth shut as appropriate, which around Adi wasn't hard to do because he did not suffer fools gladly, but he had this presence of this lion. And when he walked in the room, I mean, the whole room would actually notice. There was no way you could ignore Adi's presence and just the strength and power that he seemed to convey. You know, Steve said he found Adi a little intimidating. I can't say that I didn't get intimidated by Adi occasionally, but for me, it was a little different because I had met, I grew up literally with four-star generals in our house on a regular basis, visiting and socializing with my parents. So I was used to being around people that were powerful. The Mandali really made the four-star generals look like the four-star generals were in training for something greater, because the Mandali were the something greater. So in that sense, I had learned about being around powerful people, which was mainly keep your mouth shut. But one fine day, I went to Adi and asked him a favor. I said, Adi, my visa has expired. And what do I do about it? And he was very sweet to me. Because I was young, he kind of took me under his wing, and I think he put up with more from me just because of my age. So he said, oh, well, don't worry about that. Bring your passport to my office in the next day or two, and I will take care of it. So I drove my bicycle like an idiot with my passport stuck in my back pocket. I was wearing a pair of blue jeans. So totally not secure. You're riding a bike, and it worked its way out of my pocket and fell out on the street while I was riding to Adi's office. So I get to Adi's office, and I discover I've lost my passport. But Adi has apparently seen me there, so I have to go into the office and tell Adi this. Well, who was there in the office with Adi but Steve? And it so happened that when I walked in, Steve was like on Adi's left side and a little behind him. And he was standing. Adi was sitting in his desk. So I, have to tell Adi that I have lost my passport. And Adi is, of course, his response is, how could you be so irresponsible? And, don't you take care of these things? So he starts giving me a well-deserved rebuke. And what does Steve do? He's to Adi's a little behind and starts pointing at me and laughing. He's like making sure that Adi can't see him, but he's sort of pointing at me and covering his mouth like, boy, you're in deep trouble now, boy. And this is fun watching Adi take your skin off of you. So while he's doing that, I guess I must have been looking at Adi and occasionally glancing at Steve and back. Adi figured out what Steve was doing. And he said something to the effect like, that's enough out of you, sir. And Steve jumped to attention practically because he'd been caught. So finally, Adi stops telling me how irresponsible I am. And I said, well, what should I do, Adi? Shall I go to Mumbai right now? It was called Bombay back then, and go to the consulate office and get a new passport? He said, no. He said, don't go now. Go after Christmas. It'll be too busy. There's nothing going to change between now and Christmas. So once the new year comes along, so it was maybe 5 days before Christmas. He said, once the new year comes along, you can go then, and everything will be fine. So I was kind of impressed because at the very end, he just seemed like, he's got it well in hand, and, enjoy yourself, take time here in Christmas and then go. So that was like a Tuesday. On Friday, he would give 4:00 talks at the Baba Center right there in Kushri quarters. And I was always in attendance at those 4 o'clock talks, and so was Steve, and so was a number of other people. That particular Friday, the Sufis, not every Sufi, but a group of Sufis arrived because it was Christmas time. So they had just come into town like the day before, and about 10 or 12 of them were there for that talk in addition to the other people. So I was sitting in like the second row. I usually would sit in the second row only because the newer people could sit up front and give them but I had a clear shot. I may have even been in the first row, but generally I tried to stay not right in front of Adi so that the new people had a chance to be with him. And Adi's beginning his talk, and then he spots me, and I was literally in front of him about 7 feet away at the most, 6 feet. Steve happened to be sitting next to Adi on the floor, cross-legged. So Adi sees me and stops his talk and looks at me like, what are you doing here? And then he says, this man, he is sitting here. He has come as if this is some sort of holiday. But do you know what he's done? He has lost his passport. Has he come from for a pilgrimage or just some sort of holiday where he takes no care about anything? And so he says, you should be getting your passport fixed, but you're sitting here like there's no problem. So I began to try to say something, which was basically, but you told me not to go to Bombay yet. I didn't get one word out before Adi said, not a word out of you, sir. You remain quiet. You just sit there. He took about, I would say, and Steve, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it was about 6 minutes of one unending, I wouldn't call it a rant, but it was, I mean, to me, it might have felt like a rant. But what Adi was basically saying is this man here, this young man here is exactly the perfect example of what not to do on a pilgrimage. I mean, he ripped me a new one on virtually about 9 different things. Well, the reason I knew I was in trouble is that at first Steve was laughing. I could see Steve, he was right in front of me, and he was well back of where Adi could see him. So he was enjoying himself laughing at my plight. Until, as Adi started to really take me apart, Steve's face dropped as if he was watching someone getting dismembered. And that's when I realized, boy, this is worse than I even thought it was. This is like horrible. And I started to get angry. I mean, real angry. And understand, I was a mature 17-year-old, but still I was 17. So I had this thought. I thought, well, you know, Baba said that the avatar always makes either one mistake or 2 mistakes in each advent. I said, well, this is clearly one of the mistakes, is that he mistakenly got Adi as one of his main mandali members. That was the avataric mistake for this age, because nobody could be this mean to me, and this is so unfair, and he's so unfair. So I was just absolutely terribly angry, and Adi was no good. Of course, I'm not saying anything. And at the very last thing he says to me is, and come to my office after this talk. And then he gave this beautiful talk. Of course, I missed half of it because I was so upset and angry. So during the talk, as he was talking, I slowly calmed down and I thought, okay, now he's one of Mayor Baba's mandali and Baba's secretary, been with him since the 1920s. And I'm this guy who just showed up like a month ago. Maybe I ought to give Adi the benefit of the doubt that I'm the one who doesn't know what's going on, and I should just put all that aside, and whatever Adi tells me to do, that's what I'm going to do. So at the end of the meeting, I left the meeting, walked over to Adi's office, and he showed up, and I walked in, and he said, "What do you want, sir?" I said, well, you told me to come over after the meeting. He says, there are the people here with the important business, sir. You're not the only one. You sit out there, I will call you. So I sat outside his office. Other people came and went and came and went. And about an hour had gone by, and the last person had left over an hour ago. And I'm sitting on a bench and Audie can see my head. I'm outside on the porch. He's inside. We're actually only about 6 feet apart. And I finally decided that maybe Audie forgot about me. So I said, Audie, should I come in? He says, I will call you. I will call you when you should come in. You just sit there. So now don't forget, the talk was at 4. The talk probably didn't get over till close to 6. It is now 7:15 or 7:30. And Audie's telling me he'll call me when it was time for me to come in. I sat there until 9:20 at night. It turned dark. It was dark as anything. And I finally decided to speak up. I said, Audie, should I come in? He said, yes, come in. He was just waiting to see how long I would last out there before saying anything. I came in. I said, what do you want? I said, Audie, what would you like me to do? He says, I've already told you. You just go after the new year. You go. When you come back, bring the passport to me. I'll get your visa taken care of. So that was absolutely the end of the entire thing. And that's what I did. I went and brought the passport back. He had the chief of police come in about 2 weeks after that. I had me come in. I had to meet the chief of police. Mainly the chief of police just needed to look at me. And then the guy stamped my passport visa, and that was the end of that. There is a corollary to this that happened about 6 years later or 7 years later. Audie had given up smoking Marlboro cigarettes, but I forget what year, 79 or so, to India, and he had asked me to bring him 2 cartons of Marlboro cigarettes. So since he asked for them, I brought them. I gave them to him, and I said, and when I gave them to him, I said, Audie, I thought you didn't smoke anymore. He says, no, I gave it up. I said, well, what are the Marlboro? Why do you have? What are the cigarettes for? He said, how do you think I got your visa that time? So he used to use the Marlboros and Johnny Walker Black and different things that would be brought to him as a means to grease the skids in the community for the help of getting things done. So that was one. That was that one story about Audie. I can say, and it's funny, I didn't know that Steve didn't know that Audie worked at a car dealership. Am I right, Steve, that I was the one who mentioned that he'd worked at a car dealership to you?
Yes, you are. I hadn't known that, Scott.
There's a picture, actually, I think in the biography, of the whole car dealership in Nagpur. And I believe the car dealership was owned by Audie's older brother. But in any event, Audie loved cars. So this story happened in 1977 or 1979. I can't remember which visit. Audie visited Miami 2 different times and spent almost 2 weeks each time. It was a prolonged stay. So there was a Bible lover, and Audie used to give talks at the Seeley's house. They had this beautiful big house in Miami, and it could fit about 45 people in the living room, crowded back into the dining room. So plenty of room. And he would give these talks from like 7 o'clock to 9:30. And then at 9:30, we would take about a half-hour break. And for the people that didn't have to leave, he would talk all the way to like 11 o'clock or 11:30. So that was one of those days. And an old-time Bible lover named Phil Cowan showed up to see Audie. He'd met Audie at the East-West Gathering and probably hadn't seen Audie since then, although he'd corresponded with him. So Phil, instead of getting married or having a girlfriend or any love of his life, Phil loved Corvettes, and he was an expert mechanic. So his love of his life was this Corvette, which was souped up and really fast. So at the break, he said to Audie, I've got this Corvette. Would you like to see it? It's right outside. And Audie said, yeah, that sounds great. So they go outside, and they're looking at the vet and walking around. And Phil says, would you like to go for a ride? And Audie says, yes, that'd be great. They get in the car, pull out, and Phil like slams it into first and second and third gear, laying rubber all the way down the street, and off they go, and nobody knows where they're gone to. And they're gone for almost 10 minutes or more. And when they come back, they roar down the street, Phil fishtails into the driveway, hits the brakes. They come to a stop. I'm thinking, God, Audie's going to be pissed. I mean, the way Phil's driving. They get out of the car and pop the hood and spend another 10 minutes looking at the engine, talking about the engine. So I thought, holy smokes, this is interesting. And Eddie must really be interested in cars. Then Audie walks in the house to continue giving the talk. Well, when Audie walked in, and Phil comes up to me and he says, I've never seen anything quite like it. He says, I took Audie on I-95. We were going close to 135 miles an hour. He said, when we hit the ramp on the way up at 90, I asked Audie if he was afraid. He says, Audie looked at me and he said, when you have the conviction in the avatar, sir, you are afraid of nothing. Let's go faster. So they go on the expressway. They come back, and Phil's just thrilled because Audie's had this ride in his car. Well, that night after the talk, I used to go help Audie right before bedtime, and usually that amounted to me doing almost nothing, but us sitting in his room talking to each other. And I asked Audie, I said, you look like you enjoyed that car, the Corvette. And Audie said, I have to tell you something. If I hadn't been a Baba man, I would have been a car man. And he said, he thought that he could scare me. He said, we got on that ramp going very fast. And he asked me if I was afraid. And I told him, when you have the conviction in the avatar, nothing can make you afraid. So that was the car story for Audie and Phil. And it was, Audie just loved that ride. He had a great time with it. Steve, any thoughts on anything else? Some other Audie
no. So Audie was, as you're pointing out, was your great stories here, that he was a very lively fellow, full of life and zest, and unafraid, and lots of fun. I mean, that's when you were hanging around Audie, you could have a lot of fun. I remember too, when you're talking about how he dressed you down those times. I remember that time at the Ahmednagar Center, and I'd heard Audie dress several people down, and he could be strong. The interesting thing is that even though he was strong, he was always constructive and instructive about his dress down. It wasn't just a ration of grief. There was always something positive therein. But I do remember that time when Scott was really getting both barrels. Even and I was always ready to laugh at Scott's expense. But at that point, I tell you, I stopped laughing because it was really rugged city, and I guess it was a big test for Scott. And but he kept his mouth shut, and bravo for him. He passed the test. But it was not easy, and I think a lot of people would have had difficulty keeping their trap ski shut ski to take that amount of grief. But I remember too being in Audie's office, hanging out, and this big hulking Indian guy, 6'4", comes in and he says, Audie, I think I made a mistake in this Baba project. And Audie goes, Audie, what is it, sir? And then the conversation ensues in Marathi, beyond my scope. And apparently this guy really bungled something major. And Audie just lit into him. And this big 6'4" guy is going, his head's hanging down. Yes, Audie, no, Audie, yes, Audie, no, Audie. And then Audie says, okay, you may go. And as soon as the guy walks out, I expected, Audie was going to be in a little bit of a mood from that dress down that he gave this chap. But then Audie turns to me and says, no, sir, where were we? And just as jolly as can be. And I said, Audie, I said, you were like a lion. He was like a little sheep before you. And Audie said, yeah. And when we were with Baba, he was the lion and we were the sheep. But anyway,
I wanted to add something I almost forgot, Steve, if it's all right.
Yeah.
About
sure.
how agile Audie's mind was. I would say I have never met anyone who had as agile a mind as Adi's. He was so sharp in the way that, you know, he just could pick up on things and take them. One of the talks on Friday, there was a young man there, he was probably in his early 20s, who had been at some yogi retreat somewhere in India before he had come to Nagar. And how much he knew or didn't know about Baba, it didn't appear that he'd done a lot of reading. But so he was listening to Adi's talk, and when it came time or appropriate to ask a question, he said, Adi, he says, are you saying that you eat meat? And Adi said, yes. And he says, well, don't you know if you eat meat, you could come back as that animal? And Adi says, excuse me. He says, you, sir, what do you eat? He says, well, I eat vegetables. Which vegetable do you eat? Well, tomato, different vegetables. And Adi said, I would rather come back as a cow, sir, with your logic, than as a vegetable. If that is what happens with what you eat, I would prefer to be the cow than the vegetable. And that was the end of that guy's commentary about that. Another time in Miami, when I was in the crowd listening to Adi speak at the Seeley's house, Adi used to call me Sir Walter Scott. Why, I guess, don't even ask me why. But that day I said to Adi, Adi, in front of the crowd, I said, do you actually know Sir Walter Scott's poetry? Next thing you know, Adi is reciting verses from Sir Walter Scott. Adi was incredibly well read and had a wealth of, and Steve probably saw this even more than I did, he could quote from things. Of course, most of it was from Gujarati or other artists that are poems in other languages. But even the Western literature, he was up on. So it was always amazing to be around Adi in that respect. Never a dull moment.
Yeah, quite right. Quite right, Scott. In fact, that reminds me of another quick story here too. And then I think we ought to open this up to anybody else who wants to share. But so we're again, it's the Friday afternoon, 4:00 Baba meeting at the Nagar Center. And the meeting is going on. And there were usually like 30, 40 Westerners in there, all sitting cross-legged and all throughout the meeting room there. And as you likely recall, all around the walls, like about, say, 8 feet high, there were numerous Baba photos, all hanging out at about a 30-degree angle, and all the way around the room. And so the meeting is going on, Adi's talking, and all of a sudden this young Westerner with a beard and long hair stands up and starts stepping through the people that are sitting on the floor and admiring these Baba photos. And he's musing on the Baba photos, and people are, leaning to the right and the left to see around him. Well, as Scott said earlier, Adi didn't suffer fools very easily, so he says, you, sir, may I ask what you're doing? And the man says, yes. He said, I received inner guidance from Baba that I can stand up and admire his photos. So this is a good lesson for us all when we hear about any of this new agey nonsense about people who are claiming to know the bad motives of others somehow because they got inner guidance. I've heard that at the LA Baba Center, believe me. Received inner guidance from Baba that this person wants to do this or that. It's absurd. But anyway, so Adi apparently had run into this kind of nonsense before. And so he said quickly, he shot back without a second's delay. He said, and yes, I just received inner guidance from Baba that if you don't sit down, I should throw you out. Now here's Adi, like in his 70s, white hair, obviously an older gentleman, and here's this young strapping kid, no contest in terms of size and ability, but this guy just sat down in a New York second, and everyone could feel it, like, you're not going to mess with Adi here. Anyway, so it was kind of humorous that how quickly Adi retorted that he had received an inner guidance from Baba. And of course, in reality, he had not. Was just putting this kid in his place. So anyway, that was Adi. He was quick-witted and always fun. And at this point, Scott, do we want to open this up to any other stories from people?
Well, there was one subject you and I talked about yesterday about Audie remembering Baba. Remember you were talking about the blanket?
Oh, yeah. I forgot about that. That's true. So, of course, as Adi and the rest of the mandali have conveyed a number of times, is that Baba didn't put an emphasis on meditation, but he did put an emphasis on remembrance and active meditation, repeating his name, etc., actively as we go through our life. In fact, Don Stevens summed it up as the whole game is remembrance and surrenderance. Mansari summed it up a little differently. She said, Baba's name plays the whole game. But anyway, so just 1 second. I got to take a sip of water here. Okay. So anyway, I was thinking that, Adi didn't go in for this meditation stuff. But then Adi told me one time that I was in his office, and he said that every morning he wakes up at 4 a.m. before starting a full day of Baba work, having tea at 6 a.m. and then doing a full day of Baba work. Just nothing but Baba, Baba, Baba. And so at 4 a.m., Adi would get up, would sit on his bed, and put a blanket over his head, completely over his body, and sit there and focus on Baba for 2 hours. And I asked him, what did you focus on? He said, I would just remember past times with Baba. In other words, remembrance, whether it's repeating his name or remembering him in any way, shape, or form. In fact, Adi did say, he was asked one time, Adi, what's the best way? Baba talks about remembering him more and more. So what's the best way to remember him? And Adi said it, and it was really beautiful because it just captured in a nutshell. He said, the best way to remember Baba is anything and everything that reminds you of him. So there you go. Reading, talking, repeating, contemplating, anything about Baba, looking at his photos, anything and everything. And so anyway, that's what Adi would do every morning before launching into a full day of Baba work. He would do 2 hours of individual focusing and meditating right on Baba himself. So I thought that was a fantastic example of remembering Baba more and more. Scott, do you want to say anything? Or
yeah, on that theme, I believe it was not the 73 trip for me, but 76. When I went back, I was with Adi in his office, and I'd spent quite a bit of time, and Steve spent a lot of time with Adi too. And the thing about Adi was when you were sitting with him, you didn't just bring up subjects. If you were smart, you just let him bring up the subject. So that meant sometimes you were sitting there for an hour and nobody was saying anything. Adi might have been working at his desk or something. But one day he says to me, he said, when Baba dropped his body, it was very hard on Adi. And that was it wasn't quite the way he put it, but it was clear that it was, as you might imagine, a pretty big shock. And so he said, I began, he didn't use the word meditation. I'm not quite sure how he phrases it, but I'll use the word meditation. He began in a meditation where he said, I got so focused on Baba, and I'm paraphrasing, this isn't quite the way he said it, but the point is that he literally, he said, I could see Baba would appear before me in physical form, like it was as if he could reach out and touch him. He would see Baba. He said, I developed this focused meditation in which I could see Baba. And this went on for months. He said, but it occurred to me that Baba himself has dropped the body and left it behind. And I have spent my entire adult life with Baba's physical body. He said, but with, the master, he's dropped his body and moved beyond the limits of any body. Now it might be time for me to focus on Baba as he is now, not as he was in the body. And he developed two different unique meditations, if you want to call them that. One is, which is more familiar with most people, the idea that you sit, close your eyes, you're in a quiet space, and you imagine you're surrounded by a bubble of space. And that bubble of space becomes infinite, and you get lost or find yourself at one with that infinite. So that's one meditation. The other meditation was started in the heart, and it was seeing Baba's effulgence, this bright light or effulgent light, and as you were focused on it, it would go up and all the way up to infinity, I guess, no end. And you merged yourself in that effulgent light. So those were the two different aspects of Baba that he developed instead of seeing Baba's physical form. The funny thing is that I had assumed he'd told other people about this, but he had, it's really about remembering Baba. Rather than some sort of special meditation. I remember one person asked Adi once, "What does Baba meditate on?" And Adi almost laughed. He said, "Sir, Mayor Baba is the object of meditation. He doesn't meditate. He's the object of meditation."
Yeah, great.
The other little saying I wanted to throw in there, and Steve and I heard this a lot because we're of our age. I didn't know Adi had a fiance. I did know he had a girl that he kind of moved on from, but he'd never told me that whole story. Obviously, he did move on, or she moved on too, but he used to say to particularly younger men about getting involved with women, "Sir, if you are not a good dancer, it is important not to dance on the edge of the well." You remember that, Steve?
Very much. Absolutely.
And it's good advice.
Because as Adi pointed out very accurately, I mean, it applies to all walks of our lives, spiritual and worldly. He said he emphasized the point, the only way you can fall into the well, whatever allegory you want to use, what the well may refer to metaphorically for you, you can only fall into the well when you are dancing on the edge. But if you're standing back 10 or 15 feet away, you cannot fall. So that's, you could apply it to just diet, for example, or anything of, following Baba's orders and wishes. So it's a good message. The only way you can fall into the well is if you're dancing on the edge.
Wow, those are amazing stories. And what I'd like to do, both Steve and Scott, is, we all love to hear these stories. And I think today you're bringing Adi's marvelous array of talents and perspective and love for Baba into this room with us. And I'm wondering if I could ask you to focus a little bit on, as you think back and, the stories bring Adi more fully into our presence. If you could talk a little bit about how your relationship with Adi has helped you to shape your life with Baba.
You want to go first,
Good
Steve?
question. No, I actually don't. I'm drawing a blank. But go ahead, Scott. I'm thinking I should be able to recite 100 instances from the benefit of that, of spending time with Adi or Erich or Mara, and yet I'm drawing a blank.
I think I know why. Well, particularly in your case, Steve, but why you might. No, I'm just No, the thing, it's a good question, and I actually, Steve just articulated what I hadn't yet articulated, which is, wow, you would think that, but I realized that the connection with Audie, it was almost like the foundation of a house for me. I'll bet you Steve's not too much different. I mean, this was so fundamental to my early connection with Baba. And it's not just Audie is not the only one, but he was probably the most important one at that stage. Somehow his conviction, and he used to talk about conviction all the time. He actually, I felt like I almost got my conviction in Baba by being around him. It's sort of like you get the flavor of it, and you get the atmosphere of it, and you're learning something that's way beyond intellectual or even that you could be aware of. So I would say in many ways, Audie's so foundational to my connection or understanding and life with Baba that it'd be hard to say any one thing, because the one thing couldn't possibly express the fundamental connection or impression that Audie made on me that absolutely is still with me to this day. Steve, you got thoughts?
Yes. I was just going to, it just reminded me when we're talking about Adi's strong sense of conviction. Of course, all the mandali, Mara, Mani, Erich, Arnavaz, just everybody, had full, unwavering conviction in Baba. It somehow, I felt it more strongly in Adi. Not that he was more or greater or better or above or anything. Somehow it just seemed to come across to me more. And I do remember something that Adi had said about conviction and God realization. And that is, he said, conviction. This is the importance of conviction. He said, conviction, thy name is God realization in disguise. And God realization, thy name is conviction realized.
Steve, that was very profound. Would you repeat that to us? I think we need to hear it again.
Okay. Normally I would, but that's all I have is one repetition in me. Sorry. Evie, you got to get while the getting's good, girl.
I'm working on it, Steve.
Okay.
I'm working on it.
Okay. Ready. It's set. Conviction. Thy name is God realization in disguise. And God realization, thy name is conviction realized.
I never heard it said that way. I heard Audie often say, conviction is God realization in disguise, sir. That I heard many times, but he must have written that somewhere. I mean, that's so good. He must have also put it down somewhere.
Okay, fellas, I'm going to ask another question. So in your daily lives, what is it for you that you sit with, live with, hold in your heart that has come to you over the years, beginning with these powerful relationships you had with Adi?
I'm sorry. So what is it that bears fruit in our daily lives as a result of hanging out with Adi? Is that what you're asking?
Yes. Yeah.
I would not, one thing I would say is that for me, it's not a daily thing, but there are things that Adi said or times with Adi that 25 years later, 30 years later, 40 years later, I'm seeing a little differently. In other words, as I've matured, hopefully, or grown or changed, whatever you want to call it, some things that happened take on a little bit of a deeper or different meaning, kind of like an unfolding of a different level of understanding. So I would say that that does happen from time to time. I wouldn't say it's a daily occurrence.
Right. Like an unfolding of a deeper depth of meaning for you about something that you experienced with him.
Yeah, or something he said. And I think part of it is because by the time you get to be connected to the avatar in the way that Adi or the mandali were, the things you have to say are pretty profound, even though they sound simple. They resonate at many different levels.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Scott. Steve, your turn.
Well, again, I'm not really putting my finger on a particular instance, thing, example. I think the main thing that I carry forward is the flavor. The flavor of same thing with, you spent time with Arnavaz or Erich or Mani or Mara. Same thing with Adi. The flavor of that experience just leaves a deeper sense of interconnection with Baba that we can develop and grow through his remembrance. And so I think I just carry that with me I guess it's just a more general sense of just applying to every day in every way.
So
Go on a walk.
So
go ahead.
Sorry, no, go ahead, Steve.
No, I was just saying, you go on a walk, you give a talk, you visit with friends, whatever, you have opportunities to draw closer to him, and just through the simple act of remembrance. So I think that's, and I think we all got that from the mandali. I mean, I used to sit in Mandali Hall listening to Erich, and I tell you, those were days of heaven. It's just a fact. And same with Adi. Adi just said so many great things, and you imbibed such a focus on Baba that I was sure, I was in my 20s at the time, and I was sure that by the time I was in my 70s, I was going to have, matured into a fairly good spiritual place. Of course, now that I'm here at 77, and I realized I'm still, and no false modesty, I'm still a spiritual dud. But at least I have a shot. And that shot got magnified tremendously by Adi and the other mandali.
One comment that we got in our chat from Shaw Butler said experiencing Adi in person was to benefit from his spiritual tone. Which I think
I love that.
Yeah, lovely way to think about it. And going back to Adi's book, because Steve, I know you were the principal editor along with a number of other people that you mentioned in the foreword. Adi says this, he says, how to love him? The answer cannot be had by asking, but by creating circumstances. We should give ourselves a chance to love Baba by creating circumstances. Any and all methods could be taken up. Reading Baba literature, listening to Baba talks, listening to others' experiences about Baba, and attending Baba meetings. The most important thing in creating circumstances is to think of him with love and devotion during every moment we can spare.
I'm so glad you shared that. And I would like to just add two quickie things to that. Love and devotion in every moment we can spare. To clarify what that might mean, when Adi was still in college at Panchgani Junior College, he was also, of course, with Baba. And Baba had told him, remember me wholeheartedly at all times. And Adi asked Baba an important question pertaining to that. He said, Baba, when I'm in the classroom listening to my professors or I'm studying, I'm finding it very difficult to remember you wholeheartedly and also focus on these things. And Baba clarified very simply for him and for all of us that when you're attending to a worldly task that needs your focus and attention, then focus on it. But as soon as you're done, instead of your mind wandering off aimlessly in its various pathways that it is prone to do, that's the time when you can remember me. You should remember me wholeheartedly. So I thought that was very illustrative. And then one other point on that, Adi used to also go on about creating the circumstances. And I'm so glad you brought it up, because I guess if I were to think of the one guiding light that I got from Adi was this creating the circumstances, and Adi would go on to say, he would say, you can have a flower. He said, but if for that flower to bloom and grow, you need to create the circumstances for it to grow. In other words, you have to give it good soil. You have to give it sunlight. You have to give it regular water. You have to create the circumstances for the flower to bloom. And similarly, the flower of his remembrance can bloom. The flower of Baba's love can bloom through creating the circumstances for his remembrance. And so I thought about that so often over the years. We can create that circumstances every day in every way. And as Adi used to point out, somebody would ask him, well, Adi, how do I get rid of all these attachments that to the world? And Baba would say, sir, you cannot get rid of these attachments. They're too deep. They're too strong. He said, however, the more you remember Baba, then your attachments gradually over time become skin deep, while your remembrance of Baba and your connection with him becomes heart deep. So we leave it up to him. He does it all, but our part is through creating the circumstances for remembering him. That's our part.
That's beautiful.
And then,
the
flower of his love can blossom.
I remember
Sorry,
a couple of little things that Adi used to say. About the whole thing about, I have so many impressions, or I've got these worldly things. How do I get beyond them? And one of the analogies Adi said was, if he says, sir, if a mosquito comes and bites you, how much do you start to introduce yourself to this mosquito and ask him how he is, sir? How are you today, Mr. Mosquito? Do you engage? No. You let the mosquito go. You come back to thinking and focusing on Baba. You don't engage. Remember that, Steve? He would go into all the conversation
it's so cute,
with the mosquito. He said, he says, Baba's name is like a mosquito net that you can put around you that will help you to, avoid having as much mosquito bites. So, but that was one thing, just little practical things he would say about, don't engage with the mosquito. Where are you from? Do you have any parents? Did you go to school? None of that.
Yeah, your relatives.
Yes.
So I want to do a little bit of it. Oh, whoops. Steve?
I just said, who have you bitten before, Mr. Mosquito?
Yeah.
I want to do a little bit of a time check here. We have about 15 more minutes. And, after Baba dropped the body, I was aware that Adi did a great deal of traveling and talking. He made at least several trips to the West, maybe more than I know, and many trips around India. And Steve, I know you traveled with Adi on some of these, including the last trip you made. I believe it was to Andhra, and I'm wondering if you want to share a little bit about that experience.
Sure, I'll be happy to, but here's the thing. Two things, let me just clarify. One, the hour's getting late, so I don't want to tie people up. And B, if people have heard this story already, then then it would be better to use the time for sharing from other persons. What do you all think?
I think you should tell the Andra story, and then we'll open the floor to people sharing.
Okay, so be it. Adi was invited to, they're down in Andhra Pradesh, which is on the east coast, sort of the southern east coast of India. There's a town called Guntur. In those days, it was a small town. But a Baba lover had been working on opening up a new center there, had been working on it for years. And finally, it was about to be opened. And so Adi was given the invitation to come and help open the center and draw a big crowd and give talks and all that. And even though it was a remote area back then, still about 400 people showed up. And so we jumped on the train and headed on down. I should mention just something well, never mind. I won't say that right now. I'll move on with the story because I think we're short on time. So we arrive in Andhra, and on the way there, every train station we would stop, there would be a big gathering of people waiting to greet Adi as he was passing through. And sometimes Adi would get off the train to stretch his legs. And in doing so, there would be lots of people coming up to bow down at him, which, of course, the mandali didn't like that. So Jack and Chris Pearson and I, or in this case, on the last trip, that was with Robert Dreyfus, we would form a little V in front of him, like a flying wedge. And we would pick people up. No bowing down, and like that. And so anyway, he was popular because for years in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, Adi had toured all over India, giving lots and lots of talks, and few trips to the West, 70, 77, and another time, maybe 79 or 78. Anyway, so we're there. The opening of the center, the Guntur Center, is well received, and lots of people, and a lot of people, is amazing. Were they were on a first name basis with Adi, and Adi jovially interacted with them. And anyway, so it was a great time had by all. Now, keep in mind, one of the things that for years I'd heard Adi say, well, I'll say in this last trip to India in 79, 80, he had, and Adi passed away in March of 80. Adi had mentioned a number of times. He said, "Well, I'm looking here, my time here on Earth, and I feel that I really have about 10 more years of Baba work that I want to accomplish, and then I'll be ready to go." So that's all and he mentioned that several times. So that was a familiar refrain, and I thought I was comforted by that. That's great, 10 more years with Adi, fantastic. And yet here we are in Guntur. And as he finishes 3 days of talks, and as we finish that last day, we're Jack and Robert and I were all talking with Adi privately, and he says, boys, he said, I've completely wrapped up all my legal transferences of property and everything of the trust compound to the trust. So all my Baba affairs that were really crucial, he said, they're all wrapped up. And he said, and you know something? I'm ready to go anytime. Well, that was a shock to hear him talk like that, because I always presumed 10 more years. And the next morning, about 4 a.m., Jack and Adi were sleeping in one room, and Robert and I in another. And Jack comes to my door and says, "Steve, we got a problem here. Adi's having a shortness of breath." So I go downstairs to the hotel manager. I wake him up and said, "We need to call a doctor, call a heart specialist, because Adi has had heart problems in the past, and he's having shortness of breath. So can you call a doctor?" And the man said, "Well, no, I cannot disturb a doctor at this hour. It's too early. Let us wait until a more propitious hour." And I said, "No, it's got to be now." And so finally, I was able to bend his ear, and he calls the doctor. So the doctor's on his way. In the meantime, Adi's getting shorter on his breath gradually. Finally, the doctor arrives, and we're all, Jack, Robert, and I were all extraordinarily impatient. And the doctor comes in and opens up his bag and tries to treat Adi, but he really, we're out in the boonies. These aren't, the doctors that have gone to a university in New York. They didn't go to anywhere. So just some, rural college. So he doesn't really have too many options for treating Adi. And so we realized that this is going nowhere, and we've got to get to a nearby hospital. And in the meantime, Adi's breath is becoming shorter. And then Adi goes, Baba, 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 and goes unconscious. And so, now, of course, his breathing is really kind of minimal. So fortunately, I was trained in CPR, cardiopulmonary resuscitation. So I began doing mouth-to-mouth and heart massage on him. And while we have the car gets brought around by this wonderful Indian chap from Hyderabad, a wealthy man who provided transportation. He brings his car around, and off we race to the hospital. We had to put Adi, in a makeshift, those little things you learn in Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts, where you take a blanket, you roll at the edges, and then the person, the limp body is in the middle. Well, it's sort of like a make-believe stretcher, but with people on each side carrying, it becomes viable. So we carried him down the stairs that way, and in the meantime, I'm doing mouth-to-mouth all the way down the steps into the car, and we're in the back seat, and I'm still continuing doing the heart massage and mouth-to-mouth. And I thought, well, it's great that the hospital is nearby, and it's a relatively new hospital, so our timing is lucky. And I thought that it would be well equipped, and we rush Adi inside. And in the meantime, I noticed that the skin on Adi's forehead there's a line right at his hairline. You can see there's like a line across, and it's blue. Not a good sign. And then gradually that line the blue line begins to go down his forehead more, till now his forehead is entirely blue. And of course, saw all those training films and CPR that the people who are brought back from not breathing, but it wasn't working. Couldn't seem to sustain him. And so we go inside, we rush inside to the hospital. It's new, and it's one big, giant, empty room. Giant. Nothing in there, no equipment. And so everybody's heart sinks like, uh-oh, there's no help here. So I continued for a long time, but eventually his face entirely turned blue, and he slipped away. We all felt, in shock, but we also felt a sense of inner comfort, knowing that having the conviction that there's no way that Baba was just going to let Adi slip away by accident, that it was just Baba's time that Adi slip. And so he did, he slipped away. And that's when Jack called Erich up. I don't know, it's like maybe 6 a.m. by now, maybe even 7, I can't remember. But Jack calls Erich up and says, okay, this is what happened. And then Erich says, bring Adi's body back here immediately, drive across the country, stop at no checkpoints, avoid them, because once you stop, they will retain the body and keep it there. And it's per Baba's order, Baba's instruction, that Adi be buried at Lower Mehrabad. And in fact, there's already a place pre-dug for him. And so So that's what we did. We all three jumped in. Jack, Robert, myself, with Adi in the back seat, and then Shastraji from Hyderabad. Oh yeah, he was in the car, right? And he had his driver. So we're in Adi's, Shastraji's car, and the driver's there. So we're all kind of crammed in because Indian cars aren't big like American cars. And we head out on this 20-hour journey all the way across India. And at first, it was a little awkward holding Adi's body up in the back seat because, as you know, when you're limp, you don't. So we had to wrap him in a sheet like a mummy and put him in between us, and we rotate our positions and take turns driving all the way across. And then as we got into Pune, or near Pune, and it was my turn to drive, and then pretty soon we're at Mehrabad Road, and we're driving toward Mehrabad, and as I approach Mehrabad, I see Jal Dastur out there waiting, and there's a huge crowd of people that have come from Bombay and Pune and everywhere else they heard from. So we arrived basically the next morning. It took us 20 hours, so it's the next morning now. But there's a huge crowd gathered, and we pull in, and so then his body is quickly put on a stretcher, and all of us, we help carry him to his gravesite. Mera and Namani are there, and they're reciting Baba's prayers, and he's lowered down, and Mera throws some flowers with some beautiful words into his tomb, and then she takes a handful of dirt and throws it on top of him, and all the women mandali follow, then the men mandali, and then everybody else that's there. And then it was a rather quick farewell to Adi K. And as we reflected on it, I'd never heard him, repeat Baba's name, Baba, Baba, Baba. But he did that time, and that's how he took his last breath, repeating Baba's name. What a way to go.
Wow. Thank you so much, Steve. Wow.
You're welcome.
I'd like to read.
Does anybody have any stories or remembrances that they might want to share?
Yeah, let's see. Ray, you just unmuted. Do you have something you'd like to share? Diana?
Yeah, I've enjoyed these stories so much from both of you, Scott and Steve. And I don't have a story. It's actually a question. Maybe you have more stories or examples of it, but I don't think that either of you have mentioned so very clearly that Adi could also be so sweet. There is a lot of sweetness in the man. And I don't know if I just felt that from the little interaction I've had with him. He was very approachable and very sweet also. Do you have any examples or stories of that?
That's a great point, Diana, because even though, Adi to me and many people, he seemed formidable, he had a very sweet and charming aspect to his nature. And two illustrations of that. So we're on, I think it was a different tour. Yeah, it was a prior tour that we went on another trip with Adi, but this time with Chris Pearson and Jack and myself. And we were in the train was getting overcrowded, so we needed to share our booth with a family. And so Adi opens up the dialogue with the family members and gradually switches it over to Baba. And it was so artfully and charmingly and sweetly done that the transition was seamless, and pretty soon they're all asking questions about Mayor Baba. And I thought, wow, I got to remember how he did this exactly. You know, the kind of the methodology of how he made the transition from "Hi, how are you? My name is Adi," to then "All About Baba." But of course, I forgot. But anyway, very charming. And another example of his sweet nature, Diana, is we were on a trip with, Chris, Jack, and me accompanying Adi, and Jack bungled big time. Jack and I we were traveling separately, Jack and I, and then Chris and Adi, and we were all supposed to meet in Dond at the train station with instructions that when Jack and I pull into the train station, Chris and Adi will be there waiting, and we're supposed to jump out of the car and alert them, because those trains were long trains. So, you know, we had to have time to spot each other and get all the luggage, etc., on board. So Jack and I are chatting away, and you know what? We both forgot to pay attention to listen to the announcement of the train station that we had just arrived in Dond. And we completely missed it, and we're joking around, and all of a sudden we hear Chris, "Jack, Steve!" And all of a sudden a look of abject terror on Jack's face. And I mean abject terror, like, uh-oh, he really screwed up. He goes racing out of that train car like a bullet. And Adi's out there, and he goes, "Huh." And so I'm out there too, and we are loading up all the luggage, and then just in time, and the train's taken off. So it was like a close call. We all get back in the car, and this time it was just Adi, Jack, Steve, and Chris. And Adi proceeds to lay into Jack, and laid heavily. Now, of course, realize that back in the States, Chris and I had done a lot of Baba work with Jack. We were tight buddies. We were all close. We hung out together, and so, you know, naturally we were protective of our friend. And when Adi started laying into Jack, it was so severe and frightening. Not that it wasn't like mean-spirited or you know, excessively heavy-handed. Just Adi was clever in his way of words, so that he could reduce a person to ashes just by picking apart a foible that needed to be picked apart. But I'd seen Adi do this several times, that every time he dressed somebody down, there was always a constructive and instructive aspect to it. So it wasn't just like a temper tantrum, never. And anyway, as he was laying into Jack, Chris and I, naturally being protective of our buddy, we shrunk away into the respective corners of the berth, and we tried to distance ourselves from Jack as much as possible. And I mean, we were intimidated. Anyway, finally, the reprimand is over with. Maybe it went on for like 10 minutes, and very, very harsh and eloquent too. And so then we thought, well, this is a somber mood now here in the berth. And so we're not going to say a word. We didn't say anything. And Adi goes, well, he said, okay, anybody have any treats? And so we had some treats. And he takes the treats, and one by one, he puts them by hand into Jack's mouth, like a mother feeding a baby. And Jack would open his mouth, and Adi would say some sweet words and put a little chocolate or something into his mouth. And I was really touched by the transition from reprimand to sweetness and kindness. And it was really wonderful to see that kind of warmth come out of Adi. So that's an example, Diana, of Adi's sweetness that really stood out for me.
Diana, I had a similar and very short situation of Adi's sweetness. There were many times that Adi's softness would show, just moments, things like that. But in this case, I'd gotten a letter from he was an older relative, like a second cousin, but he was 70 years old and I was 17, and he was a Rosicrucian. So he wrote me a letter that arrived in Ahmednagar while I was there, because he knew what I was going for. So it was a sweet letter encouraging me towards the light, towards focusing on God. And it was very inspirational letter. And Rex was his name, clearly cared about my spiritual pursuit. I mean, it was something he admired. So I get this letter, and I told Audie, somehow I was there reading it in Audie's office, because that's where the mail used to come. And I said something about this man and how encouraging he'd been to me. And somehow or the other, I handed Audie the letter to read. I don't know if Audie asked me if he could read it or I suggested it. I'm not quite sure how that happened, but he reads this letter of this man who's somewhat of a mentor to me. And I look at Audie, and tears are just rolling down his cheeks. He was so touched by the letter, and he said, you know, this, you're lucky to have this man is a relative.
Wow, beautiful.
Thank you.
So, my friends, Diana, thank you for asking that. So we're at the end of our time, but the Zoom can be kept open. And just in closing this part, I'd like to just invite each of us to take a couple of breaths and just kind of rest in Baba's presence and just allow something to emerge for you from today's session that you can carry with you. And as that emerges for you, I want to read to you a prayer written by Adi in July 1979. Beloved Meher Baba, bless us all, so that in the stress and strain of our daily life and the fluctuations of our mind, we learn to relax wholly and wholeheartedly and float on the ocean of your love and call for your breath of joy, your breeze of compassion, and your wind of strength to flood into every fiber of our body, every corner of our mind, and every space of our heart, to cleanse us of all our impurity and make us worthy of your love, of your obedience, of your service, and above all, your pleasure. So I want to give special thanks to our friends, Steve and Scott, and your long and abiding relationship with Baba and these beautiful stories that you've brought really to life for us today, to really think about now and going forward. So with that, I think we'll end this part of the session, and the floor will remain open for those who would like to stay on.